This is Cosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is episode 7. Is that right?
Yes.
Episode 7, Cosmographia with Randall Carlson. We also are joined by Brad and Mike, and I'm Russ, and this is
Kyle.
my brother Kyle. He is the studio engineer, and I am the guy that asks dumb questions. So, Randall.
Don't ask him that question.
Oh, stop.
Did you, I was not going to ask that one. Did you see the two things about lunar landings? India's lander failed.
I did take note of that.
And then China's rover on the backside of the moon has seen some interesting, quote unquote, gel-like substance inside of a crater that they're now looking at. Gel was an interesting word. Yeah.
Moon ooze.
That's right. Moon ooze. So people were saying it might be a mistranslation, and the word might be glassy that they meant, because it was a translation from Chinese. But anyway, I thought those two things were interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about the moon. Is what I'm trying to say.
The steering going on. I see.
Well, we were actually.
The moon. Yeah, we'll get into that someday.
Yeah, we will. But we've been working on Atlantis, so. I think we should dive right back into that if you're ready.
I'm not quite ready yet, but
Uh-oh.
Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, now I'm ready.
All right, sweet.
Well, today is 9/9, so maybe that points us back to the moon, or a little moon teaser at least.
Oh yeah.
9/9, yeah. And the symbolic interest or significance of the number 9. Yes. 9. Well, let's see. We find 9 in some sports, don't we?
Sure do.
Golf.
Of course we do, yeah. Golf.
Golf. Baseball.
Baseball.
Of course, baseball.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we could break down either one of those two sports because they're both very saliently symbolical once you look at them. Right?
Oh yeah.
Lunar
Baseball.
connections.
Yeah, obviously, lunar connections. Baseball. Okay, so how many stitches on a baseball, on a official league ball? Kyle?
72?
No, well, you're the man. You're the
144.
2/3 of the way.
Oh, I'm not supposed to guess. I'm supposed to look this up.
Well, I was told at the outset of this that was your job.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Kyle
Okay.
also doubles as the watcher. So.
Which is tough because I can't listen to people and type at the same time.
Well, I think there are now surgical procedures that could help that.
Okay.
All right, we know that number, but I guess we're getting officially Google verified here.
We're getting it official.
This
We're
is
making
good.
it official.
No, this is good.
Yeah.
Didn't find it with my first query.
Well, one thing's for sure, he's not reading the stitches on a fast ball.
That's right.
Okay, well, the easy
Wow.
one. We'll let Russ answer. How many
216.
innings are there?
216? Is
Yeah.
that what it says?
According to an article found on www.roanoke.edu, the baseball is hand-stitched together with 216 raised stitches using 88 inches of red cotton thread.
Okay, so
There are 108 double stitches on an MLB baseball.
There you go.
There it is.
yeah, there you go. 108 double stitches. So you got 108 and 216, right?
Yeah.
And the diameter of the moon, very, very close in miles, is 2,160 miles.
Yeah.
So there's your link right there. The first link of many. So how many feet between home plate and first base, Kyle?
Oh, man. I'm going to make this take
90?
too long.
I thought it was 90 feet. I don't know.
It is 90 feet.
Yeah,
Ah,
90
thank
feet.
you, Russ.
I used to
90
play
feet,
baseball.
yeah. And so then how many inches does that give us?
Ooh.
90 times 12. Come on, calculator.
1,440.
No,
I don't know.
no, you got to work on your math
I
skills, Ross.
can't math.
1,080.
Okay.
1,080. Now,
1,080.
now here we got to pause for a minute and think about this. So you have a ratio going on here, right? The distance from home plate to the center of home plate to the center of first base. And likewise, because it's a square, right? So it's 1,080 inches from first to second, from second to third, from third back to home plate. So now you've got this distance divided into these 1,080 increments, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now you think about the ratio of the moon and the moon to the mile. You have the radius of the moon, which is a ratio. 1,080 increments defines the radius of the moon. See that? So
Yep.
yeah. And so now it's from the distance from home plate to first base, from first base to second base is going to be 2,160 inches. And the full distance around is going to be 4,320. So interestingly, just purely by coincidence, it doesn't mean a damn thing, but these are exactly the Vedic numbers, the numbers that the whole Vedic system of cosmology is built upon. And
Right.
I'm not maintaining that that's anything other than pure coincidence.
Coincidence takes planning, as Mike says.
As somebody said.
Malcolm
all-
Nance.
They're all processional numbers.
Yes, because the Vedic numbers are processional numbers. Yes.
Yeah.
That's the whole. Yes. So you've got the cosmological numbers of the Vedas, and just by some quirk, they end up in the sport of baseball. In terms of the dimensional relationships.
And they all add up to 9 also.
Yes.
Yeah, which is one of the peculiar, interesting properties of the number 9, that any multiple of itself
Right.
ultimately reduces back to the single digit 9.
Yeah. Yeah. In other words, all those numbers are divisible by 9.
Well, that's not what I'm saying. 2 plus 1 plus 6 is 9. 1 plus 8 is 9. 4 plus 3 plus 2 is 9.
Right. Yeah. It's like the numbers that are divisible by 9 into equal increments. You can also add in the individual digits of those numbers up to get 9.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's weird. Yeah.
Or you can eventually reduce it down to 9 by doing that.
Right. If you keep adding them up, you
Yeah.
eventually get 9. Yeah.
That process has sometimes been called Kabbalistic reduction,
Ah.
where you take a number and reduce it to a single digit. And if it's a larger number, you may have to go through several stages of reduction
Right.
to ultimately resolve it to a single digit. But yeah, so like 432, or 432 multiplied by, raised by the power of 10 times 3, 10 to the third power, you've got the number of years in the Kali Yuga, 432,000. Raised by 10 to the second power, you have 43,200, which is the number of half the number of seconds in a solar cycle, in a diurnal cycle. So if you can pinpoint, which you can, I mean, you could literally pinpoint the equinox down to a mere fraction of a second, right? But if you do that, if you can pinpoint the equinox down to less than 1 second, because it is literally, I think, like we talked about last week, just a moment in time,
Yeah.
Mhm.
which could be reduced to something almost infinitesimal, but still have just a little bit of duration. But let's say significantly less than 1 second, right? Then at that moment, there are 40, with respect to that moment, there are 43,200 seconds of dark and 43,200 seconds of light. You see, for
Yeah.
that moment, on that one spot where that moment would occur. See, in the diurnal rotation of the Earth on its axis. So it is built right into the astronomical, the way, and so the question is, again, it's purely coincidence. We don't attribute any meaning whatsoever to this, right?
Well, the
So-
mind blower to me, though, is that also that I guess there's some variability, but the radius of the sun is 432,000 miles.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so if you measure the radius of the sun in miles, you get the same number as years in the Kali Yuga, which is the basis for the system of yugas and kalpas from the Vedas. So the Dwapara Yuga, which is twice the Kali Yuga, is 864,000, right?
Yeah.
And then, mm-hmm.
And what makes that weird is because, like, at first you could say, well, it's based on the mile, like those are all divisions of the mile, right? The sun is that many miles in its radius. But then when you look how they arrived at the mile, and you're like, wait, no, that's still based on all these geometric links between all these bodies. So,
well, see, and that's the thing. You don't know. I mean, who knows really what was the origin of the mile?
Right.
It goes back. I mean, you know, you can make assumptions about historical assumptions, but then you can go back and find what appears to be the usage of the mile, even back in the laying out of Stonehenge.
Yeah.
And we could do an analysis of that at some point too, to see how that works out.
Write that one down.
Those same numbers. See,
the other thing is that the 43,200 is the scale at which the height and the circumference, or the not circumference, the perimeter of the base of the Great Pyramid are to both the polar radius and the
equatorial radius.
Yeah.
Equatorial circumference.
Yeah.
Right. And what's interesting there is, and again, this is just purely coincidence with no significance or meaning at all. But the point is that if you were to expand the pyramid by 43, scale it up to 43,200. Yeah, you now have a square that's equivalent to the Earth's equatorial circumference and its height. And this is a hypothetical pyramid, because the real pyramid, if we're talking about, which we're referring to here, the pyramid of Cheops, has a truncated top.
Right.
So, but we can derive a perfect pyramidal geometry based upon the 51.85 degree angle of slope to base. So we can recreate a geometrically idealized pyramid, and we can then proceed to analyze that particular geometry. And when we do, we find that the internal geometry basically presents a very close approximation of the classical geometric problem of the squaring of the circle. And because it does that, what happens is we end up with the square base of the pyramid. If we use that scaling factor, 43,200 to 1, the square base of the pyramid, now if you could take that and reshape it into a circle, it would now just precisely fit the Earth's equator.
Yeah.
That's wild. Pure coincidence.
Purely coincidence.
And they were obviously playing baseball,
right,
when they were doing this.
Somebody was. I think that's the point.
Yeah.
But in order to understand the scale of that baseball game, we need to go up perhaps 3 orders of magnitude. And maybe that's the point here.
Yeah. No pun intended.
Yeah. Because, and we could look at the game of golf as well. I mean, we talked about that post-recording.
Yeah.
Didn't we?
True.
So at some point we'll have to come back to that. Yeah.
We will have to come back to that. Yeah. I'm going to have to have my dad down here. The stash needs to be down here for that episode, because that is going to blow his freaking mind.
He's a golfer?
Oh, yeah. He loves golf. I'm just going to stash come down. We're going to record a Randall Carlson podcast, and your mind is going to explode like all night.
You give him that book for some holiday or birthday, that Golf in the Kingdom.
Yeah.
That'll
sure
start
he'd love that.
way. Yeah.
It's a good idea.
Take a note.
Take a note.
Totally note it. And, if you're going to watch the video version of this podcast, I think there's probably a couple graphics that I can insert with that last little discussion there to get you a visual for it.
Cool. Aside from that map, that beautiful map behind you right there.
Yeah, the squaring of the circle and the.
You need to put the appropriate graphics back there behind you as we're talking.
I was thinking about it. I could probably pull that off here. I'm getting better at this. I just have to duck out of the way.
And just for the information for anybody who's watching this video, on Brad, what's happening there is you may catch a glimpse now and then of Brad's doppelganger hanging out right behind him. Yeah,
what
yeah.
that shadow is. Yeah.
He does a phenomenal job of staying precisely fixed behind Brad. You only can catch an occasional glimpse of him, but he's there and he's listening in.
All right, so yeah, I'm gonna be steering person here again. Yeah, so a good little teaser on some background moon info. 9-inning baseball, 360 feet around the bases, etc. As we went into. So yeah, let's get back to where we were going here. Atlantisville.
Okay.
So yeah, we were looking at the Mid-Atlantic Ridge when we kind of wrapped things up last episode.
Let's get back to the Mid-Atlantic Ridge because we hadn't really covered everything that was worth covering.
Cool.
Because we're trying to put this on a solid scientific basis here.
That's right.
Minimal speculation. Maybe at the end, once we've made our case, the scientific case, then we'll be more free to speculate. All right. So
here we go.
We've been learning about isostasy and eustasy. So let's be clear on the difference between those two terms. Mike, Russ, what's isostasy?
Excuse me. I used to know this.
It is the moving up and down of the...
Sure. It's the vertical movement of the Earth's crust based upon loading and unloading.
That's what I was going to say.
That's what you were going to say, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, I guess I'll give you a second chance here. Define or just tell us, what is eustasy? E-U-S-T-A-T-I-C-Y.
That one I don't know. I know you've told us.
E-U-S-T-A-C-Y.
C-Y, yeah. I don't know what that one is.
That's what happens when you are blind. Like when you go blind.
Oh yeah, you used to see.
You used to see.
Oh, nice.
No.
Okay.
Guys.
Off the rails early.
Sorry.
Okay. Eustasy is simply the rising and falling of sea level because of glacial expansion and contraction.
Oh, okay.
That's right.
If we're talking about the eustatic rise or eustatic fall of sea level, the assumption is pretty much always that that's going to be a function of the growth and the shrinkage of glaciers on land. So when the glaciers expand, sea level falls, and that would be a eustatic fall or eustatic depression of sea level. Now, when you're looking at sea level, if you're standing on the coastline and you're watching the sea move in and out, because obviously as the sea level is coming up, the shoreline of the sea is moving inland, right? And so when glaciers are growing, sea level is dropping, the shorelines are moving seaward rather than landward. Makes sense, right? So the term we're going to use in this is the geological term. So a regression of the sea when its level is falling, and a transgression when the sea level is rising and the shoreline, the sea is now encroaching upon the land. So we've got transgression and regression. And so those are sort of interrelated terms. Eustatic rise, eustatic fall of sea level are going to cause transgression and regression. And that eustatic rise and fall of sea level is going to be a function of the growth and shrinkage of ice caps up on the continent. Got it? Now, for all time, for the rest of this incarnation, you will have that information
at your
disposal. I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
I think at this point, you've got it. Okay, so all of that is relevant to what we're talking about here. Whether or not a case can be made for an actual Atlantis, a proto-historical Atlantis that would have more or less conformed to what Plato actually describes in his two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, right? That's kind of what to set out what we're attempting here. So in order to accomplish that, what we're going to do is we're going to continue to look at the narratives of the dialogues themselves to see specifically what Plato is saying. We may sometimes refer back to the original Greek that he used, the Greek terminology, just for clarification. And then we will go into looking at what actually science can be invoked or rejected that might support or refute anything specific that Plato says. What we found so far, though, is that when you have a eustatic rise or fall of sea level, you get an isostatic response in the Earth's crust. So when you depress the Earth with the ice grows, it depresses the crust of the Earth. And when you release the ice, the Earth rebounds. Likewise, the evidence now is showing, and we've begun to present some of that evidence, is that when the ice sheets are melting and the ocean level is rising, you're now increasing the loading on the ocean floor by trillions, hundreds of billions of trillions of tons of weight, literally, onto the ocean floor. You're going to get a response from the ocean floor. That's the general idea here. Now, another important idea, the geoid. The geoid is the geometry of a stable Earth, which is always fluctuating because there are constantly forces impinging upon the Earth, both internal and external, that are wanting to change the minute, the very precise shape of the geoid. But the geoid is constantly trying to maintain moving towards equilibrium. When you have the rapid onset of an ice age or the rapid termination of an ice age, and you have this rapid melting of ice and this rapid transfer of weight from the continental surface back into the ocean basins, it causes a response in the shape of the geoid. Now, because of that, when you have the vertical movements left above or below, what's going to happen is you're going to now have a region of the crust that's now out of balance with the Earth's center of mass, if you want. The tendency then is going to be for that crustal region to try to accommodate the fact that perhaps now, if it's been unloaded, let's say you're talking about a region of the Earth's crust that's being unloaded, and let's say it's at 70 to 80 degrees north latitude, and it rises by 1,500 or 2,000 feet. Well, you can see right there that that's not the distance from Earth's surface to the center of mass of the geoid anymore. You'd have to get closer to the equator for that piece of the crust to now resume equilibrium with the geoid center of mass. So what I'm getting at here is that it's likely that from the geophysical studies of the Earth would imply that there has to be accelerated lateral movement of the Earth's crust in addition to vertical movement. You see, this is kind of what I'm getting at here. So the glacial loading and unloading is going to have pretty substantial consequences to the shape of the geoid and the response of that geoid. And this response, when you have the isostatic response, it's highly probable that you're going to have a seismic response or a volcanic or both accompanying those shifts in the geoid and those redistribution of the tectonic plates. Go ahead, Mike.
Which brings us to the question I asked at the end of the last episode about, with this massive unloading of the glacial ice, the ice cap, and the loading of the water into the ocean basins, and if you posit that there was such a thing as a continent, whether you wanted to call it Atlantis or whatever, but there was some sort of land mass there, and you've got this ridge and you've got this flexion going on, right?
Yeah.
And you got some subsidence. Surely there would be other evidence around the globe of such a major shift in the.
I'm glad you asked that question, Mike. I really and truthfully am, because that's kind of where we're going with this, and we will try to get some of that in this episode, and probably can carry it over into some of the next episode to see exactly, because yes, the point is that there should be evidence. For one thing, one of the things that I would surmise is that let's say you have, as the eustatic rise of sea level presses down on the ocean floor, you're going to have an isostatic response. And that isostatic response may not be necessarily uniform. It may involve seismic movements. It may involve tremendous dislocations of the along the fault line there, because we know we've even seen in modern earthquakes that are up, around hitting 8.0 on the Richter scale, like the Alaskan earthquake of '64. There were gigantic offsets of 30 and 40 and 50 feet, right? Now, we could be talking about here seismic events that are an order of magnitude beyond anything we've looked at in history. I mean, that, and in fact, there is some data and evidence to suggest that there were enormous seismic responses, both in, for example, the Pacific Northwest, but also in the Fennoscandian region of Northwest Europe to the rapid glacial unloading. And we can actually devote some time to looking specifically at that evidence. I don't have it right at my fingertips tonight, and that would be somewhat of a diversion. But yeah, we're definitely going to look at some stuff that would suggest that the subsidence of the ocean floor was not necessarily a gradualistic or a uniform process, but involved discrete jumps, if you will. So let's jump back to speaking of the jumps, let's jump back to 1972. What were you guys up to, Russ and Kyle, back in 1972?
Graduating college.
Waiting to be born.
Okay, you guys were waiting to be born.
Riding my big wheel.
I cannot believe I'm actually the oldest guy here.
Yeah, 72. I'm not going to get into what I was doing in 1972.
He was busy in 1972.
All I can say is that it was 1972. I was 21 years old and single, and we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Was a very good year.
You were busy. Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Okay. No, 72 was actually a pretty good year for me. 72 was the summer of 72 was when me and my brother built those 2 geodesic domes up in northern Minnesota.
Ah, cool.
Yeah. So that was really the start of my fascination with building and geometry. Yeah, I would say that that's very much, because prior to that, even though I grew up around building and knew a little bit, I just wasn't that interested in it. But after we built those 2 geodesic domes, I got interested in it. And then when one of them came out in the national publication Shelter, which we'll pull up one day, and I got to read in there, and that was the first time. So 73, the year later, was the first year I actually learned what the golden section was and how it applied to art and architecture. But that was a direct consequence of building these 2 domes. So that 1972 was a good year for me. So anyways, this particular article came out. This paper was published in 1972, just for some perspective on this thing. And it's referring back to an article that was published by a prominent geologist named Daly back in 1925, who first was speculating about some of these ideas that are relevant to the things we've been talking about here. So I'm gonna quote here from that article here, and you'll be able to see what we are talking about here. So in a paper largely ignored in recent times, Daly in 1925 pointed out that changes in surface load over the oceans because of eustatic changes in sea level would deform the Earth. And according to Rudsky's 1889 calculations of the surface deformation of a homogeneous elastic sphere, right? Homogeneous simply means it's going to be, this is a theoretical sphere the size of the Earth that's going to be homogeneous, right? Meaning it's the same density and consistency throughout. Elastic meaning that it can move and respond. It's not so rigid that it resists changing shape because of the surface loading and unloading, right? So it sounds complicated, but it's not. Calculations of the surface deformation of a homogeneous elastic sphere. So his calculation showed that the deformation would be of significant magnitude. Got it?
Got it.
So then he goes on to say that in late glacial time, the major changes in load originated from the melting of ice over Fennoscandia and North America, and the simultaneous worldwide rise in sea level from the released water. Because the surface loads involve the lateral transfer of mass, so must material be able to move laterally at depth within the asthenosphere. Now, you see what we're talking about there.
I recognize it. He's saying what you were saying earlier, basically, that it can't move out and remain balanced in terms of the center of mass. Isn't that what you were talking about? It has to have some lateral motion.
Yes, but now what he's talking about is the material down even below the crust, where it becomes moltenly elastic, right? So what he's saying is that material, because the surface loads involve a lateral transfer of mass, so must the material down below be able to move laterally at depth. Okay, so in other words,
oh, I see.
Yeah, you got it. I think you got it. Yeah, you got it.
The material, the liquid material below has to be able to move around.
Right. So think about this: is the ice is building up on North America, and it's bearing down, it's pushing the plastic material outwards.
Right.
So when you're releasing weight from the ocean, you're not only the point here is that you're not only releasing the weight from above, you're now increasing the pressure from below. Because that plastic material is being squeezed to the side.
Right.
It's like squeezing a water balloon.
Yeah, it would be like squeezing a water
balloon. It bulges out, squeezes this way and bulges this way.
Yep.
Perhaps, Mike, if you could take a break and you could get a balloon and you could demonstrate that.
Demonstrate for us.
Beach ball's good. That might be easier to access.
So the point is that when the ice is forming and it's pushing down on the crust, you can imagine the molten magma underneath actually squishing out to the sides. And then when it melts and it's lifting back up, you're going to have this flow running in underneath.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
And the accumulation of the ice, though, was done over so many eons that the Earth had time to adjust gradually.
Right.
The unloading was so relatively sudden.
Actually, Mike, we need to qualify that because, I mean, as the token uniformitarian in the group here,
I'm not the token uniformitarian.
I didn't necessarily mean that as an insult. Remember.
All right, I'll play the devil's advocate. Go ahead.
Sure.
He's not going to believe anything you say now.
He never does.
Yeah.
No, where were we?
The point I was making was that.
Right.
Right.
Well, yeah, the point is made and accepted. Other than the fact that I will say, actually, there's quite a bit of evidence that shows that the onset and growth of the glaciers was really, really quick.
The younger dry part.
Well, no, that was the late phase. That was the re-expansion of the ice sheets.
Yeah,
right.
Okay.
That was the younger dryas. But see, there was a major expansion of the ice sheets between 25 and 30,000 years ago. Right.
Oh, right. Okay.
Now, so maybe we could use this opportunity to do a couple more terms. We're talking about a continuum here, but we've got two endpoints on this continuum. We'll define an interglacial as being basically what we're in now. But now a full-on interglacial, which the Earth has actually been in multiple times, would mean that there's essentially no significant accumulated landmass of ice. Therefore, sea levels worldwide are going to be somewhere around 70 or 80 feet higher than they are now during a full-blown interglacial. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about what would probably have prevailed during the last couple of 100,000 years, right? So you've got interglacial on one side, which would be represented by now, right? And then you've got a full-blown glacial, which would have been represented by the last ice age, let's say 15 to 20,000 years ago, right? And obviously the full-blown glacial is going to correspond with the lowest subsidence of sea level, right?
Right.
Now, the climate in turn is having to oscillate between those two extremes, right? But those are the extremes, and all of the climatic oscillations do not go to those extremes. So you might have this climate doing this, but sometimes the climate might do this. See? So
Right.
in order to accommodate this scale of climate change, we introduce a couple new terms. And so we refer to those as a stayed and an interstayed. A stayed would be like a glacial, but not as much ice. So maybe half as much ice or 2/3 as much ice. An interstadial would mean there is some ice left, but still more than there is today. Like there may be residual ice caps, but much smaller over, say, Canada or Northwestern Europe.
Okay.
Not completely gone like they are now, because there is no perpetual, other than mountain glaciers, there's no perpetual glaciers in Canada anymore, right?
Right.
So you've got interglacial, glacial, interstayed, stayed. So here's where these terms and these concepts apply. When we go back to the previous, say, period of contracted ice, was it an interstayed or an interglacial? Well, it's pretty much agreed that to go back to the full interglacial, we go back around 105 years ago to about 120,000 years ago, which was called the Eemian period, E-E-M-I-A-N, the Eemian period. And this was a period where actually sea levels were probably 10 feet or more higher than now. And this is generally accepted as being the last full-blown interglacial period where there was no more ice on the planet than there is now. Now, the old assumption is that after this last interglacial, you had a slow return, just like Mike was talking about, a slow return of the ice sheet and growth of the ice sheet. But this may have lasted 50,000 to 100,000 years. And then it began to melt away 25 or 30,000 years ago. So it was a much more protracted process back, say, from the year 1900 up to the 1950s and 1960s. But that all began to change when radiocarbon dating data came online, because one of the things that happened was that in many regions where Canada had previously been assumed to be under this unbroken mass of ice for tens of thousands of years, they were finding pollen and seeds and evidence of trees and vegetation and stuff that's dating to 30,000 years ago.
Right.
So now, this has not been done extensively enough to determine, are we talking about a full interglacial here? Probably not. But are we talking about an interstadial? Probably yes, where ice was very much constricted relative to what it became 10,000 years later, right? Now, if that's the case, there should also be a corresponding oscillation in sea levels, right? You know, let's say interglacial, sea levels way up here where they are now. Full glacial, they're down 400, maybe even 450 feet lower. Boom, boom. So interglacial, full glacial. But in between that, you've got interstayed, stayed, interstayed, stayed. Because all of the oscillations in sea level are not going to be at these two extreme endpoints of that continuum. You're going to oscillate within that. So in order to address those more complex variations in climate, in glacier formation, in sea level rise and fall, that's the reason for the introduction of these additional terms. So here's the important question. When we go back 30,000 years ago, it is clear that the ice sheets over northern hemisphere were considerably constricted to what they became a short while later. And it seems that the transition from a interstayed into a more full glacial occurred between 26 and 28,000 years ago. And that by 20,000 years, those ice sheets had reached their full LGM or late glacial maximum. So the implication there is that there was an enormous amount of glacial growth between, say, 26 and 28,000 years and 20,000 years ago. In fact, much faster than previously had been assumed.
That's not overnight, but that's pretty quick.
It's not overnight, but it's definitely quick. Yeah, it's definitely
it's
quick.
really fast.
In geological terms, it's that, you know.
Right.
So this is important. We're going to come back because that's an important part of the discussion. When we start talking about these great oscillations of climate, we have to come right back to this stuff that we're talking about here, because it all bears directly on the question of climate change. Because obviously, in order for the glaciers to start growing over Canada and in Northern Europe or shrinking, you're talking about an accompanying climate change, a drastic climate change of some kind, driven by something, right? And we're not sure what, but we can speculate fairly intelligently. And one of the things that we can say with almost 100% certainty is it's not carbon dioxide driving those changes. No, I mean, that's pretty much easily demonstrable that it's not carbon dioxide. That, in fact, what we can demonstrate is that carbon dioxide fluctuations in the atmosphere are following that, because as the ocean warms, it outgasses CO2, and when it cools, it sucks the CO2 back in. It all has to do with the solubility physics of carbon dioxide. But yeah, so what we see, and again, at some point we're gonna get into that, because this is important stuff, and it's stuff that people do not know, that they need to know in order to have any kind of an informed opinion on this, highly politicized matter of climate change.
Yep.
So not to get too far off, but I think these concepts are important, actually. And if we have these concepts as part of our toolbox, we can come back and talk intelligently about whether or not there could have been such a thing as Atlantis, or whether it's just complete woo. We should forget about it.
Woo's good. I don't have a problem with some woo.
No, listen.
What is the?
There's a place for woo. Just like, if you're going to have a piece of cake, sometimes you spread a little frosting on there.
That's right. There you go.
But, the problem is you wouldn't want to have a steady diet, 3 meals a day of frosting. And the sad thing is there's a lot of people, that's what they consume, is frosting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would.
Yeah.
I'd get pretty sick, I think, after the first 2 meals of frosting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Listen, I love frosting, and I have to resist because I have a sweet tooth. But now I have finally, at this stage of my life, I think, learned to resist the call of sweets.
Yep.
So.
Got it.
Cake is just an excuse to have frosting.
Okay, let's get back to some objective material here.
Well, I wanted to ask you. Oh, okay. You have. Never mind. Go ahead.
Go ahead. You can ask before we.
I wanted to ask you real quick. What is the, like you read this excerpt from a paper in 1972. What is the modern day take on isostasy in terms of?
Well, I mean, the basic physics was worked out way back then, and it hasn't really changed.
Okay.
I mean, what may have changed though is more empirical data showing that yes, this rapid rise and fall of sea level and isostatic adjustment of the Earth's crust. I mean, yeah, there are many more studies that have been done since then that simply bear out the fact that yes, there are these vertical movements of the Earth's crust, and we'll get into some of that right now, if that's okay with you guys.
Well, I guess it's all right with us.
Okay, so let's go on here. This paper, by the way, was published in Quaternary Research, which is really one of my favorite journals, actually, always amongst a list of about a dozen journals that regularly addresses concepts of global change in a variety of forms. It's the R.I. Walcott is the author, and the title of the paper, this is for anybody who wants to look it up and read the paper for themselves, Past Sea Levels, Eustasy, and here Eustasy is spelled E-U-S-T-A-S-Y, Eustasy and Deformation of the Earth. Past Sea Levels, Eustasy, and Deformation of the Earth. And Kyle, do you ever use Google Scholar?
No.
So right now, while you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs, why don't you type in Google Scholar?
Okay.
I have used it. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. They're getting more and more papers online.
Yeah, it's very useful. This is a great site, though.
Okay, I've got it here, but it is not giving an option for a PDF. No.
Okay.
You would have to go back to the journal itself. So, there was a time I actually have this paper because I began putting this information together in the 80s and early 90s before there was an internet. So when I'm talking about a paper from 1972 that I've got here, chances are I've got like a photocopy of that paper that I might have made 25, 30, 35 years ago.
Wow.
Right, but now you get more and more, you're getting access to stuff online, but a lot of stuff is, behind a paywall that requires, but if you use Google Scholar regularly, you'll find that there's quite a few things that, just try this, Kyle, just put in glacial isostasy. Just put that in and see what comes up. And this is, I think, useful to get into because people who are listening to this might want to do their own research. And if, students already who've done graduate level work, you're going to know all about this.
So just for new people that may still think that you're an amateur, let them know how many PDFs you've got and how many scientific papers you've read through in 40 plus years. I mean, you've got thousands is my guess.
Well, yeah. I can do a quick calculation. I usually will read typically at least one science paper on average per day. I mean, on weekends or if I'm not really busy with work, I might read 2 or 3 of them in a day. It depends. A science paper can be 1 or 2 pages long, or it can be 40 or 50 pages long, depending. But so, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say on maybe even average 2 per day. So that would be, 700 per year, and that times 40 years would be about 29,000 papers. Now, I don't remember every one of those papers word for word, but I'll have to state right at the outset here.
You got pretty damn good recall.
Listen,
But yeah, ultimately, I did find there's PDF access to a bunch of these articles. Like,
yeah.
You can either buy them or some of them are free.
Some
you
of
can
them
share the
some of them are
papers.
free.
So that's really cool. Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Google Patents is also really awesome. That's off the subject, but.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well let's keep going here. I hope these little asides are less distracting and more useful to people.
This is Cosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast.